Hey guys, so this is the beginning of a series I'm hoping to do on Smite and sort of the numbers behind why certain things work. Today we'll just be going over sort of the different metrics that get used in these videos going forward. The goal of the series is to help give the community a bit of an understanding into why things work, whether those be team fights when you are watching the SPL and all of a sudden a team wins 10k down in gold. Why are they able to win that team fight? Or why is it that teams keep using this particular strategy? Why was last season dominated by the invade meta? And also looking at things like why is this particular team comp working? Whether that be sort of there's this new unusual team comp that they're using, or is there just a good explanation for why is it that we have a standard team comp, loosely speaking, that works particularly well. So, breaking this down a little bit, the macro goal of Smite is always kill the enemy Titan. The number one obstacle to this is the enemy team, and of course there are towers and phoenixes in the way, but we'll largely ignore them for now. The relevant sub goals to killing the enemy Titan are killing the enemy team and getting a lead. These can happen in either order in my experience. So some of the metrics for killing the enemy team, which are of course I will describe as flashy metrics, the numbers that everyone really wants to care about. They're the numbers like DPS or effective HP and damage. DPS is of course just damage per second. You take how much damage done over a certain period of time and you average it. This gets a little less useful whenever you're looking at things like junglers who typically are not auto attack based, and so things like cooldown. So if you pick a window where they've only dealt damage for for the time it takes them to get their abilities off, it's a little less useful. But if you can keep that window of time fairly consistent or keep the end goal consistent, you can use DPS to measure different strategies of dealing damage to see which one is better. The other relevant stats I mentioned a little bit earlier, effective HP and damage. So this is something talked about in Word of Thoth when it comes to protections. So when you have a certain amount of protections, the amount of damage dealt to you is not necessarily equal to the amount of damage dealt to someone else with a different amount of protections. Also, as part of this, you have healing and anti-heal. Healing increases your effective HP. Anti-heal increases your effective damage by the amount that they would have healed. So each of these stats interplays particularly nicely with one another to create this fun sort of logic puzzle of how to explain the effectiveness of items. Time to kill is a very simple number to help sort of boil down who's in the lead at that point. It helps you to sort of figure out points of or tiers of power at a stage in the game. And by doing that, all you do is you take every person with their current build and you take their maximum DPS on each individual target, and you see how long does it take for them to kill each target in particular, and whichever team on average kills the enemy team faster has the advantage. Time to kill is a good sort of intermediary metric to understand who has a better lead than the others, when it's not as obvious as like an item lead or things like that. Lifetime damage is really useful for gods like Zeus. He's my favorite example of this. Because over the lifetime of a team fight, he is going to die. So how much damage does he get off in that team fight before he dies is his lifetime damage for that fight. This is really good mano a mano, or while you're damaging someone else and the jungler has come up and surprised you and is dealing damage, things like that. Average damage is just a way of understanding how poorly people play is the best way to put it. So average damage is a typically negative multiplier to put on an ability for to help sort of give you a better understanding of numbers. So if the typical ability damage is 100, your average damage will probably be something like 70, because you hit the ability 70% of the time, or something like that. Raw snipes are sort of infamous for you fire off a bunch of them, but you only really hit a few of them, unless there's some setup. In that case, the average damage on the ability goes down every time you use it. Execution threshold can apply to things like Thanatos ult, or it can apply to a team fight where you're looking at a team that is ahead, having a threshold that they need to execute down to or above, that is lower than perfection, essentially, where even if the enemy team plays perfectly, they can play down to that level and still win. Or if you're behind, here's the level that you have to go beyond what I'll describe as perfection, or par is probably a better example. So if you go better than par while you're behind, how much better than par do you have to go to in order to win the team fight? That's your execution threshold. How well do you have to execute? That is sort of a way to analyze essentially how good was a particular play by a team, or how much did the enemy team mess up, or how much did they need to mess up. Things like that is a tool to try and quantify moments in Smite. Relic value is something that can be done either retroactively or preemptively, looking at things like if you have Aegis and you Aegis a Poseidon Kraken, that is significantly higher value than if you Aegis sitting in base taking no damage. Or if you shell your entire team and all 10 block stacks get used up, that's significantly more value than just shelling one person. Also, lead value is a little more sort of unique, and this one is looking at not how much gold are you ahead by, but how much stat-wise are you ahead by. Do you have Fire Giant on you? Have you completed your item and the other team hasn't? Looking at not the gold they play, but just the stat differences around the map, and that's the value of your lead. And of course you have things like objective damage. This is where you start talking about trade-offs, where certain damage types apply to certain objectives and other ones don't. Ability damage applies to Titans, Fire Giant, Gold Fury, but not to towers. Whereas crit damage will apply to Fire Giant and Gold Fury, but not to towers or Titan. And so this is where you start dealing with things like, if they don't have a hunter, can they really deal enough objective damage after winning the fight? The getting a lead metrics are luckily much smaller parts of what I'm going to be doing, but there will be useful portions of it, particularly in ranked. But for the most part, the metrics here are just GPM, gold per minute. You take a period of time and how much gold you got, you average it out. Net worth is the amount of gold you have accumulated to that point. Your level is a result of your experience that you've gained to that point, and XP per minute is just the average of the experience you've gained over a period of time. These are all pretty straightforward, but will help us get a little bit of a better look. Something you might see a little bit of is time to a level. So by doing a particular farming strategy, what's the time it will take you to get to a particular level? So a big one is, how long does it take a support to get to level 12? That's really important because that's when your support gets his basically last major power spike of his second relic. You also will also be dealing with opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is, by definition, by doing one thing, you cannot do the other thing. I, as a single player, cannot be farming back camps and getting farm in off of the mid wave. Cannot be in two places at once to do that. If I try to invade the enemy speed buff, I can't also be doing my own speed buff. There are opportunity costs. We'll also be looking at some of the numbers behind farm splitting. I might do a little bit of a history look at things like why splitting was so big before and why it has fallen off so heavily now, sort of the numbers there. And farm pathing is a little less of a numbers game, but it will be numbers driven. So a little bit of logic of where is the farm on the map and how do I connect the dots the best I can. You could throw numbers into that, but that's a lot of higher level math I don't feel like getting into. So instead it will be stuff like how valuable is a certain point of farm on the map. Lastly, I'm going to leave you guys with my suggested sources, which is one source, Word of Thoth. Flareboot does a fantastic job every season of getting out a fantastic numbers guide to Smite. Word of Thoth is the place to go if you want to know the numbers underneath Smite. It is the biggest source I'll be using for everything. I will, of course, be linking to any Smite VODs clips that I'll be using if I'm doing some SPL analysis, but for the most part, Word of Thoth is the place to go if you want to understand the numbers behind why things work. I really look forward to seeing sort of how this is received and develops going forward, but I hope this was a good introduction to this series on Smite and why do things work the way they do.